Hello chess friends and welcome to Yazarov's chess channel and welcome to another great game from the Computer Blitz Chess Championship in 2020. Today again with an Immortal attack played by Stockfish NNUE against another top engine Defenchess. Today's game will be a very interesting game because Stockfish will play the so-called Maroxy bind, and I think the Maroxy bind is a perfect opening for Stockfish NNUE as it has improved itself, of course, in this positional games. Of course, we knew always that Stockfish is good in tactics, but now with this new component, Stockfish NNUE is playing much more better positionally, and this Maroxy bind is basically a positional setup. In this game, Stockfish will again build this attack slowly but securely, then will improve the position of minor pieces, and when the pieces are on best squares, then it's time to strike with some tactics. So let's check out now the game. I think it was a very instructive and a cool game here by Stockfish NNUE. And as usual in this top engine games, we said round 1 and we have this Mortal Kombat sound fight. So e4 played by Stockfish NNUE, c5 by Defenchess, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4 c takes d4, knight to d4, and now bishop to g6, preparing bishop to g7. c4, this is now the so-called Maroxy bind setup against the Sicilian. So what we can notice, white has a very powerful centralized knight. Knight takes d4 is not an option. Queen to d4 will happen. You will have some troubles here on dark squares. And basically, the good thing about this move, c4, is that we are also controlling the very powerful d5 square. In order to kick away the knight, it's not so good if you play e5. Then you leave also a backward pawn on d7 and also a weak square on d6. The best way here, one of the best ways, is in some occasions, this is not possible in this particular line, is to break the position with move e6 d5. So with a pawn breakthrough motif to crack a really white's pawn center, but so far it's not possible because you have weakened your pawn structure already with the move g6 and you still want to play something like bishop to g7. I think this pawn breakthrough move motif e6 d5 is possible when we play maybe a French Sicilian setup. If you're familiar maybe with the French Sicilian, c5, then we play e6 and then maybe d5, then a d5 motif could be possible, but not in this Dragon Sicilian setup that black has played here. I think it's very risky to prepare this move because what we can notice after potential knight to c3 move, white has really a powerful domination around the square d5. You see both of these pawns are aiming, the queen is supporting this square, the knight will be protecting the square. So one of the best ways here for black is to go positionally into the game. What we can notice always in Maroxy bind setups is that white has here a bad bishop situation. So what we would love to do in some occasions, not always, but I use the plan sometimes when it's possible to get rid of the dark square bishops off the board. We want to trade off these two pieces off the board, and then after potential d6 we could have still a good activity with our light square bishop, for instance, but white has maybe a bad bishop position with the bishop on f1. Still, as I said, this is simply one of the most complex Sicilians that you can play. If you want to study it hard, because as I said, I really had my troubles against the Maroxy, and it's really one of the best ways here for white to beat the Sicilian. So here bishop to g7, we have bishop to e3. You see so far the game is centralized around the square d4. We have queen to b6. It seems like a dangerous idea, but it's not a problem. We still have this move knight to b3, kicking away the queen and protecting, of course, our b2 pawn. So queen to d8, knight to d4, knight to f6, and now knight to c3. We have knight to g4, which is a simplification line for black. It is played, it has been played many times. It's not a problem about that, but I think the success by black in this particular line is not so good. I most of the times I wanted to show you also one line how I play against the Maroxy. I play simply castling, maybe I've said something like bishop to e2, here d6, castling, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and now maybe something like a5. This could be playable, queen to d2, and maybe something like knight to d7, cementing our knight on c5, trading off the dark square bishops, and at least we're battling, as I said, against the bad bishop on f1. Still, white has a powerful control over the d5. That's not the point. As I said, said, my recommendation wasn't to battle simply around this d5. One of the best ways is to try to go positionally with the positional trades of pieces. In this particular line, that's one line I'm suggesting. It's of course also a very complex middle game, so I've lost also many times in this particular line, so it's not the point about that. But as I said, here this move knight to g4 is playable. It leads now into a simplified line: queen takes g4, knight to d4, and queen to d1. Okay, white has traded off one minor piece, of course, but still, after knight to c6, rook to c1, I think white's pieces are much more active. Here the knight is a little bit out of game. You can maybe maneuver the knight to e5, but still, after something like h3, f4, still the knight can be kicked away from a centralized square. So, okay, d6 here played by Defenchess. We have bishop to e2, queen to a5. Attacking here the knight, maybe there are some possibilities. Bishop takes c3, queen takes a2, but it's really not possible after castling. And if you try bishop takes c3 to grab simply one pawn, rook takes c3 will happen. And if you grab this pawn, queen to c2 is the best way, because we're threatening now rook to a3 and trapping the queen. So in this particular line, you're forced to retreat with the queen to a5, but now c5 is perfectly fine here. You see how we activating all of our pieces. The problem is now that black's king is still in the center. We are threatening here c takes d6, creating another weakness on the d file. If you try, for instance, something like d takes c5, rook to c5, and now queen to c3, you see how problematic this position can be. e5, but still bishop to h6 prevents, for instance, black from castling. So taking here the knight is never an option, I think, for black. Although you can grab a pawn, but continuing the game without the dark bishop is really suicide, I think. So after castling was played, queen to d2. We have b6. Again, bishop takes c3, you see rook takes c3. Now even queen to a2 doesn't work anymore, because you get rook to a3 and the queen is trapped. So because we have moved now the queen here to d2, we are protecting our b2 pawn. So rook to c3, again, not a possibility. So here for black. So queen to d2, we have b6, building a double Fianchetto style here by Defenchess. We have rook to d1. Again, you see how Stockfish NNUE builds first the setup. All of the pieces are basically on good squares. As I said, the main issue is the slice square bishop, which is blocked out so far, but temporarily by its own pawn. So bishop to e6, we have f4, rook from a to c8, b3, fixing the pawn structure. Here knight to b4 was played, and now bishop to f3. We maneuver the bishop on an active square. There are maybe in some occasions some e5 pawn breakthrough motifs. So far it's not possible, but in order maybe to liberate our long diagonal for a light square bishop, e5 is one of the possible tactical motifs. Here rook from f to e8. Again, if you try bishop takes c3, it's not so good, because we'll simply take queen takes c3. You cannot take with the knight. Here if you try queen takes a2, then again there are some tactical shots here with the rook to a1, trapping the queen. It's really a bad position here for black. So if you try knight takes a2 here, I think we can simply take out the queen. Here you see this is a weakness. We can try rook to a1 attacking, and I think black will lose both of these pawns and will continue with the bad endgame, because white has still had the bishop pair, a nice rook activity, and this could be game over. So after the move bishop to f3, again you see you cannot do something here on the queen side. Rook to e8 was played, bishop to f2. We maneuver the bishop, keeping the pawn structure here compact, keeping the minor pieces compact. Really, again, nice positional move by Stockfish NNUE. We have h6, we have a3, kicking away the knight. If you take queen takes a3, then knight to b5 is really a threat, because you cannot take rook takes queen to b3. You get rook to b1 and you lose your knight here on b4. So that's why after the move a3, knight to c6 was played, and now queen to b2. We have queen to a6, and now bishop to e2, now threatening also some c5 pawn breakthrough motifs with the discovered attack on the queen on a6. So queen to b7, finally this queen is out of game. That's a huge thing now here for white. Still, with these tiny little moves that have been played so far, I think that white didn't lose any activities with the minor pieces. That's the most important thing here, but at least the annoying queen on the A file is out of game. The queen is now cornered. It doesn't have such a great activity. Now queen to c2, remaneuvering the queen, and now after king to h7, we have h3. That's what I meant. We're building first our minor piece activity. We're building a nice attacking setup. Now it's really time. h3, g4, f5, bishop to e3, bishop to d3. Really, whenever you feel that you can do that, attack. Please attack, because attack is only with attacking moves you can win games. h3 prepares now really a nice attack here by white. Bishop to d7. We have b4. The flexibility of the Maroxy bind leaves really white some expansion possibilities on the queen side, but also on the king side. So you see, it seems to me that black is a little bit pushed away by this pawn activity in the center. In the game, knight to d8 was played, trying maybe to get use of the c file, attacking maybe the c4 weakness. Queen to d3, we have knight to e6, and now we have bishop to e3. Again, simply improvements of minor pieces, but still the activity is perfectly fine of the minor pieces of whites. Bishop to c6, we have bishop to f3, protecting our pawn. Queen to a8, and now h4. This is really now the tactical Stockfish, because so far it has been a positional Stockfish, but now after the move h4, Stockfish is announcing really a great tactical game. Here bishop takes c3 was played. If you try h5, then it could be really risky, because f5 can happen, and if you retreat with the knight, we have f takes g6. After f takes g6, we can play e5, would be a mistake. You see, we cannot do that, although we're threatening something like bishop to h5, but we can simply take. So the correct move would be here something like g4, again breaking the position in front of the king. And when we finally take, for instance, g takes h5, then it's maybe time to break the position with the move e5 and create a discovered attack by the queen on the king. So see how this activity of the bishop now is perfectly fine. This bishop still has a good diagonal in the game. After the move h4, we have bishop takes c3, rook takes c3, and now knight to g7. Here Defenchess gave up the bishop for a knight in such a dynamic game. It was really a risky choice, giving up the bishop pair. Now you see what Stockfish will do here in the game. Bishop to c1, remaneuver the bishop, because so far we had now really great activity on this diagonal, but we can also maybe use this diagonal and threatening some checkmates here on g7. In the game, f5 was played, and now rook to e1. We have e takes f5. Pardon me, f takes e4. Sorry, I'm a little bit messed up. Here, f takes e4, we have rook to e4, a very nice exchange sacrifice. Here, h5 was played by Defenchess, because if you take bishop takes e4, then we have, of course, bishop to e4, and it would comes with an attack on the queen, and you lose your g7 pawn. Then we can maybe somehow remaneuver the rook here to g3, bishop to g2, and with this bishops on the board with such a naked king, I think black is simply lost. So taking the rook is not an option here. After rook to e4, we have h5, and now f5. This is really a monster move by Stockfish. Although this f5 is protected twice by the pawn and the knight, Stockfish breaks the position. We have knight to f5, but now rook to f4, and now after bishop to f3. Find now the best continuation. As usual, we say test your might in chess. Try to see now the best continuation here for white. It's really not so easy to see. I'll give you a hint. The first move is here. Rook takes f5. But now after the move bishop to e4, try to see now really the best next move. It's really great attacking move by Stockfish NNUE. Really incredible what Stockfish does here. Okay, here Stockfish plays a very immortal rook sacrifice. Rook takes h5. Incredible move. It comes, of course, with a check. You have to react. After g takes h5, we have queen to d2, and we see now the dark square problems in front of the king. It's simply now, I think, too much to handle. As I said, giving up the bishop, the dark square bishop, you can only do, I think, when you play the Sicilian as black, when you trade it off for another dark square bishop of your opponents. But now when you give up the dark square bishop simply for a knight, you see now the battery that white has built here. It's perfectly fine here. It's a lost game for black, although we're the whole rook down, but this king is so naked in the game. King to g7 was played, queen to f4, trying to sneak in with the queen. Rook to g8. If you try rook to f8 to attack the queen, then you get checkmated. Rook to g3, you can maybe cover, but now queen to h6. After king to f7, you lose immediately, so you're forced here to play king to f6, but still it's a lost game. So after move queen to f4, we have rook to g8 and now rook to g3. Bishop to g7 was played and now queen to f5. Very important move. You cannot protect everything because king to h8 was played. If you try even to cover somehow, then we have again queen to g5 and then queen to h6, loses again the game. Here after king to h8 we have rook to g6, rook takes g6 and now queen to g6. Now the queen is really there. It's lost, as I said, for black in the game. Queen to b7. You see how far away these pieces have been. The queen on a8, the rook on c8, simply too far away from the action. Now black is desperately trying to bring some more defenders into the game. Here queen takes h5, king to g7, bishop to h6. We have king to f6 and now bishop to g5, king to g7 and now queen to g4. We're threatening, of course, some discovered attacks by the queen. Queen to c6 was played and now very important move h5 here by Stockfish NNUE, because we have now really two active pieces. This pawn is now also included in the attack. Very important move because it cuts off some very important squares for the king maybe to escape. The g6 square is now not an option. Here queen to e8 was played by Defenchess. If you try queen to c4, it's not so good because you get bishop to h6, and again it's a forced checkmate in 4 because if you take, for instance, the bishop, then we have queen to g6. So here after bishop to h6, maybe you could escape king to f7. But again, here queen to g6, it's game over. If you try, for instance, king to f6, then bishop to g7, again you have only one square, king to f7, but now queen to g6, and again bishop to h6, queen to g7. Really nice attacking flow here by white. Combined the queen and the bishop are creating this very important checkmate pattern. So after the move h5, you see Stockfish has included another piece in the attack. Queen to e8 was played, and now we have bishop to d2, this discovered attack, king to f6. If you try king to h7, it's not so good because we get queen to e4, king to g7, and now comes really a tricky move, queen to e6, because the queen is a little bit stuck to the defense of the rook on c8. This wasn't played in the game, but now the queen cannot play somewhere here in order to defend the king. The rook is hanging. If you try, for instance, rook to d8 to escape, then bishop to c3, then again g4, you see we can build really again a new attacking possibilities. Now the serious threat is g5, g6, but the queen is here centralized. Basically it holds two of these pieces of blacks. It's really paralyzing the whole center of the board with this bishop's activity, and these two pawns again. Black is in serious troubles. And after the move bishop to d2, king to f6, but now h6 here was played, queen to g8, queen to f3. We have king to e6, but now queen to h3, again attacking, and now h7, very important move. Now we see this very important pass pawn, and the problem is now for black that this potential promotion is on a dark square, so we are always threatening bishop to c3, and here also the promotion on h8. So here queen to c4, we have queen to h8, here queen takes h8, and after this move it's basically game over. Queen to h5, queen to e6, and here bishop to g5. Here queen to e3, forcing a trades of queens, but black is not interested into that. Queen to h3, we have queen to g6, now the check. Here queen to d8, king to g7, here queen to e7, king to h8, and now very important move b5 to stop a little bit black's potential progress on the queen side, paralyzing, again creating sort of a Zugzwang motif. Here king to g8, queen to f6, bishop to f6, here bishop to f6, and after king to f8. Pause the video and let's give again Again, test your might and find out the best next endgame move. It's really winning immediately, so let's give that again a new Mortal Kombat sound. So finish him, finish your opponent now with a great tactic. I think it's winning immediately because we can notice now one endgame pattern here, and it's the distant pass pawn. So what Stockfish does, of course, is to move bishop takes e5. D takes e5, although we have the same pawn count, but this distant pass pawn is something that you should always notice in your potential endgames, because black is always stuck to the defense of the potential promotion here on the g file. Our opponent's pawn is much more towards the center, so we are getting closer to the queen side, where of course the rest of the pawns are, and we can now use this path in order to take out these pawns. As I said, when we move our pawn, our opponent's king is simply too much deflected from the queen side, and that's a really nice tactic by Stockfish NNUE. King to g3, here we're moving towards the pawn, and now simply g4, king to e6, g5, that's the goal. Here, as I said, we can create a pass pawn, and here black tried a different path, but queen to g8, and here after king to d6 it was game over. So cool game, I think. Great Maroxy bind. You see, first positional setup, then improving minor pieces, building this attack, not rushing into attacks, h3, g4, f4 motifs. Then, when the pieces were on the best course, of course, such a beast like Stockfish NNUE will see its tactics, and great attack again by the fish. And as I said, Stockfish is basically unbeatable in this computer, and in this computer Blitz Chess Championship. It hasn't lost any game so far. It's in the lead, of course. We'll see who'll be on the second place, but still more rounds to play, and I'm looking forward to cover this tournament further. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more positional and brutal attacks like this, check out my commented chess games played by computers. And if you want to see the best chess games played by humans, check out my commented chess games, the best chess games of all time series. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.